So we just looked at how do atoms become ions, and that's by gaining or losing an electron. So ions, they're forms of an element that have more or less electrons. And now this video, we're going to look at how do ions actually form. And there's two main ways that it can happen, going from an atom to an ion. So one of the ways it can happen is in a chemical reaction. Or the other way is a special, different types of radiation can make ions too. And that's called ionizing radiation. So remember, here's our electromagnetic spectrum. Which is showing all the types of light radiation or electromagnetic radiation. And remember, gamma rays and X-rays and ultraviolet light, they have really high energy. And that's the type of radiation we're talking about here. High energy radiation is dangerous because it can make ions, which can damage atoms, and it can damage parts of our bodies and other living things. So the basic way of picturing radiation is that radiation comes in from some source like the sun or a nuclear weapon, and it hits an electron, and then that electron just bounces off because electrons interact with radiation in some way. Usually radiation removes electrons, but some types of radiation can actually add electrons too. So the next way that ions can form is through chemical reactions, and we'll look at that now. So in a chemical reaction, we have one element, an atom of one element, and it interacts with another atom, and they basically swap electrons. So we can see here we've got sodium, which symbol's Na, and then we've got chlorine, which is Cl. And sodium, it has 11 electrons here we can see, and that's because sodium is number 11. Chlorine, we can count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Chlorine has 17 electrons because it's number 17. And remember, we learnt in the last video that atoms try to gain a full outer shell. And we remember that the goal, the magic number for the full outer shell is 8 electrons. So sodium, we can see its outer shell, it only has 1 electron in its outer shell. And chlorine, on the other hand, 2, 4, 6, 7 electrons on the outer shell. So for sodium, it's much easier to just give away its 1 electron, and then suddenly the next shell will become its outer shell, and it has 8 electrons. So that's perfect. So sodium says, I'll give away 1 electron. And then chlorine says, well, great, I've got 7 electrons, so it's much easier for me, I'll just accept that 1 electron, and then I've got 8. So chlorine, it gains 1. And we can see here, the sodium loses 1, and the chlorine gains that extra 1 over here. So sodium, if we lose an electron, we are losing negative charge, so we've gained a positive charge, in other words. So sodium becomes a positive ion, and chlorine, it's gained a negative charge. So it must be now a 1 negative ion, which we call chloride. And now that all these atoms are ions, they have an overall charge. And remembering what we've learnt about electric charge, if we have positive and negative charge, then opposites attract. So if we ever have sodium and chloride ions near each other, they'll all attract each other, and they join together to make this big compound here, which we've all seen before, and you eat it pretty much in every meal. It's sodium chloride, which is salt. So ions are formed in a reaction, and then they join together with chemical bonds. So ions are formed in a reaction, and then the ions bond to make a compound. And there are lots and lots of different ionic compounds where 2 different ions are attracted to each other and they make this crystal shape. Pretty much every rock and every mineral on Earth is made of ions, and lots of different ions are important for us in everyday life.